Okay, so today we're looking at the Elgato Facecam 4K. Just from its design, you can tell it's got a nice kind of cool, almost retro-y industrial design. It's a pretty big camera. It's got a 49mm lens element, so you can put filters on it, 1/4-20 on the bottom. It also has a very nice monitor mount that I'll try to attach while looking at the camera and still getting everything set. There we go. The monitor mount, just so you can see that, it will articulate downward, so you can do desk down shots, for example. And you know, because it's threaded in, it lets you turn it, and it's got a nice motion to it. The bottom has one of these more tripod-like screws, which I like actually in terms of being able to easily add and remove them. But very quality in terms of its fit and finish. Yes, it is all plastic, but it does have USB-C that you can detach at the back of it. The cable is pretty long though. The cable that came with this, I think, is a 2-meter cable. And that's what I usually advocate for something that is, especially for a gamer that's going to be playing with the camera on top of their monitor and maybe their CPU's on the floor or your CPU's on the floor, then this is going to help in terms of making that reach. So again, this is the Elgato Facecam 4K. The cool thing with this one, as well as the old Elgato Facecam Pro, is that it will do 4K at 60 frames per second, whereas most cameras will do 4K at 30. It will only do HDR at 30, but it will let you output in RAW. And the other cool thing about the Elgato cameras is that as you set them up and store settings, they will actually store an onboard storage on the camera. So you don't have to worry about as you move from device to device, or maybe you have an A10 mini or something like that. It will actually store the camera settings on the camera for your lighting and everything else, how it's set up in your room. You don't have to worry about resetting the camera necessarily as you move between different devices. So that's pretty cool. And you know, I think it's a pretty beefy looking device. There's a lot of things that you can do in the software that I'll show in a minute, because Elgato's been doing this now for a while, and there's a lot of configurability, things like being able to use different NVIDIA broadcast elements and the SDKs from NVIDIA in terms of image segmentation to do background blur and background replacement, all of those things. So it's a pretty nice camera. So we're going to look at the camera footage itself. Then we're going to have a look at it, what it looks like in low light, and look at the software. We're going to see how everything plays out in terms of its price, around $200. Let's see if this is a good value for money. Okay, so this is the Facecam 4K, which will film at 60 frames per second in 4K, 3840 by 2160. This camera has pretty amazing specs from that frame rate perspective. The one thing that's a little bit different about this camera, which is not a bad thing, is that it's fixed focus. So as I move in, for example, with this box, you'll see there's no focus hunting. That's not a bad thing. I think I'm still pretty sharp. I'm about maybe 3 feet or 1 meter away from the camera lens. And it looks, I think, pretty good. It's a wide angle lens. You can tell it says it's 90 degrees, but I want to say it's even wider than 90, because like if I compare it to some of the other 90-degree cameras out there, I'm going to venture to say this is more like 100 degrees, depending on where you measure, if it's diagonal or, you know, from the center line, horizontal line of the measurement of 90. It does have a F1.4 lens, which is basically how it can do fixed focus, because that aperture means that you're not going to get those kind of background blur situations. That's why my background is more or less in focus. And when I put the box up to the lens, it's basically in focus too, even though I'm within a few inches of the lens or a few centimeters of the lens. Now, it basically means that anything focal length 21mm or further out, think, 8 inches or so and beyond, is going to usually be in focus. And that also means that, everything that kind of is in frame will be in focus that way as well. It does have not a crazy large sensor. It's got a 1/1.8 inch Sony Starvis sensor, which is actually pretty standard, but I want to say the optical stack, the glass, everything looks like it's pretty high quality from the camera's perspective, given that it is fixed focus as well. And that's giving you the image that you see now. One gripe or nitpick I would say about the image is it is a little bit undersaturated for my liking. I think the background and everything looks pretty good, but skin tones wise, I'm a little bit warmer on the skin tones by default if I just stood in front of a mirror, for example, than the camera is showing me. And you'll see that kind of when I go to my Sony camera, which doesn't have a lot of color correction or anything on it. I've got some exposure adjusted. So what I want to do with this one is use the Elgato app and kind of adjust exposures and see what I can get this one to look like if I can kind of get it to closely match the Sony. I won't be able to get it framing wise, and the funny thing is the Sony's a good 3 feet further back than this one with a 23mm crop sensor lens on it. So this one is a super wide angle camera. There is no built-in microphone, but you do have, again, 4K at 60 FPS support. So this one's pretty unique. Just this one and the previous Elgato Facecam Pro would do 4K at 60 FPS. Okay, so this is the Elgato Facecam 4K filming in low light. I only have my one light up on the upper right side that's kind of firing down. A little bit of reflection off the wall, but basically my computer monitors are my only real light source, and you can see what it looks like in low light. I had to crank up the noise reduction in settings. Remember the noise reduction from before. If I set it to off, I'll just show you what it looks like in low light, and it's crazy how noisy it is. So this is noise reduction being off, and I can go to low. This is low to see what that looks like, medium to see what that looks like, and then high to see what that looks like. The rest of the settings, I reset everything. So let me try just to make sure that I'm fully reset to all the factory defaults on the camera. There we go, to give it the best kind of settings that it can have. And now one more time I'll go to the defaults on the low noise reduction to see if that helps at all compared to before. And yeah, it's a little better, but it's still super duper noisy compared to some of the other cameras I've been testing recently with like the 1/1.5 or 1/1.3 sensor size. So you can tell when there's not enough light coming into this camera, it gets pretty darn noisy. I'm going to keep testing this and tweaking the settings. Let me know what you think about the default image, but let's go into some image tuning on this one and see what we can do with it. Okay, so I'm going to record this time the actual Logitech Camera Hub app so you can see what the different settings options are there. You can see here in terms of preview format what the different camera frame rates and resolutions are that are available. It has 2160p 60, 2160, which is 4K by the way, 30 frames per second. Then you've got the various 1440p's and 1080p's at 60 and 30. So I'll set it to 2160 60, which is 4K. You can see that at 4K 60, like you have to have a pretty beefy computer and graphics processor to even run it. So you'll probably see a little bit in terms of frame drops and things on the screen. And I've got a discrete GPU, so it's actually shouldn't be dropping, but I wouldn't have thought at least. But now at 1080p 60, you can see that it's running and it's more smooth. So what did I change? Well, a couple things that are pretty cool with this camera. First, it can shoot in RAW, which you're seeing here. It actually saves the settings to the camera. So let's say you go between different machines. You go from a PC to a Mac or something, and you're in the same lighting situation. Whereas in some cases, you might have more configurability on the Windows side. I don't think it's true on this one. You can save the settings basically to the camera, and then because of that, it will have those settings in there. If you use another device like an Atom device to do the video switching, and you do USB to HDMI, for example, on this camera, you could set the settings inside the camera, and it will save to the camera, which is actually pretty cool. Then you have zoom in, zoom out, so you can zoom in terms of like field of view. It's just digital zoom though, it's not an optical zoom, so you will lose resolution as you zoom in. Contrast settings, everything was more or less, I think, kind of 50'd out. I went up a bit on saturation because, as I showed earlier, it was a little bit desaturated. I also went up a tad bit in terms of sharpness, and usually sharpness is one of those things that I use to tone down any noise behind me, but I think in this case you could actually use a little bit more sharpness. If I go back to, like, I think where it was at 50, it still looks pretty good. But because it's fixed focal length, it feels like, or fixed focus I should say, it feels like a little bit of sharpness kind of makes it a little bit more like crispy looking in terms of its focus, as long as the background doesn't get noisy, which it's not. That's a good thing, and part of that's probably because of the processing low noise reduction. I turned off automatic exposure. If I turn that back on, let me just show you. Now once it's back on, actually it's okay now, but when I was at 4K 60 frames per second preview, it wasn't looking as good. So if I turn this back out, it brightens up a little bit. As you start to go a little bit different in terms of like shutter speeds, if you go darker, for example, you'll start to see delays and things in the video. Like it'll actually change the speed and the lag and everything in the video too. So you want to be careful in terms of how you use that. Same thing with the ISO. I've noticed this on other cameras, like for the longest time, where changing some of the camera settings might actually affect the performance of the camera. The white balance, when I went to automatic, you can see it kind of makes it a little bit too green, blue. My lighting is daylight 5000 Kelvin, so that makes my skin tones a bit closer. And then there's different noise reduction levels. You can go low or medium or high. This will also introduce more processing, so it might lag out your camera a little bit. Whereas if you turn it off, you can see there's a little bit of noise. You can kind of see it there. Not sure if it'll come in through YouTube compression, but with low noise reduction, it actually gets rid of all of that over sharpness kind of noise that you see in the background, and the little bit of artifacting that you'll see in what you saw on my forehead, for example. There is a little bit of a light spot, it looks like, so let me see if I can just change the angle of the lens a little tiny bit and get rid of that. Kind of still there. You can see it just right here. When I move in, it's a little bit of flare from an overhead light, maybe like a hair light. But maybe if I go over here, it's better. But that way you can, in those cases, because this camera is moving pretty close to me because it's so wide. If I move it back to where my Sony's at, which is like 2 meters back or 6 feet, it will shoot like beyond the span of my arms to things way outside of my normal frame. So that's why I'm not showing that. But this is a very, very wide angle camera. This kind of gives you an idea of the software that you've got. It has additional effects too in terms of mirroring, flipping the image. You can apply your own LUTs, which is pretty awesome in terms of webcam. I have just the sample LUTs here, but these all look not too bad. It kind of depends on the look that you're going for, but you know, this is kind of more of a dramatic look, but you can see the LUTs are actually pretty nice in terms of the settings that you want to add, so it gives it a bit more of that cinematic feel to it without impacting the performance too much. And then you can always tone down the intensity a little bit if you want to on the LUTs. And there's AR effects if you've got NVIDIA Broadcast and NVIDIA Stack turned on, it will do some of that stuff. So all of these require basically the NVIDIA AI components in the back end. All right, so now I've got the Camera Hub app with the kind of NVIDIA, in my case, it's an RTX A2000 Quadro GPU, and you can see that I've got the AI background and everything here that's usable. So I've got on minimal blur, which I think is kind of the most authentic looking in terms of background effects, but of course you can replace background if you want to do that. These tend to be a lot cleaner in terms of the segmentation AI on how it's cutting you out versus like using something that's built into, say, Zoom or Microsoft Teams, because you can see the lines are pretty crisp in terms of my shirt, my head, my hair a little bit. The hardest part is the top of my hair, and it's still pretty good. You can see a little bit that it's green screen. That's what the blur kind of takes away there, because then you have almost perfect segmentation. It's just a little bit soft on the lines of my shirt and my hair. plus that little bit of lens flare on there, but based on my light. But yeah, this is where I'd recommend if you use these types of effects to do minimal blur if at all possible. Okay, so that's the Elgato Facecam 4K. It is a pretty nice camera. Like I do like the design, even though it's all very plastic in that sense. But I gotta say, in terms of configurability, in terms of its image, it's a little weird that it's a fixed focus lens, but I think that probably helps in a lot of cases, especially if you move around in and out and various things. It's still pretty well focused because of that F1.4 aperture. So that means that you're not going to have like background blur if you want that. But if you do want it, you can use the NVIDIA broadcast integration for very light background blur to give you that kind of mirrorless DSLR look on a low aperture lens. In terms of things I didn't like too much about it, I thought the white balance was a little bit on the unsaturated side. I should say white balance slash exposure slash default settings. But that was configurable. You could see I could dial in the image pretty well. The image was pretty sharp. I would say the cameras that have even larger sensors, the 1/1.5, 1/1.3, and over 1.2 sensor size tends to be better, but the downside of like the Razer Kiyo Pro Ultra is that it takes a long time to focus, so you kind of lose the first 2 or 3 seconds when you turn it on. Whereas this one will never have that problem in terms of taking a second to focus because it does not focus. It is basically a fixed focus camera, so that is good. The low light performance in terms of noise, and I think that's because of the f4.0 lens, it's probably not getting enough light into the sensor, so it's crazy noisy. Then you need to have effectively the noise reduction AI filtering turned on for the camera in order for that to look less noisy. And some of those things are things that you normally see when you turn the sharpness up too high on a camera. But I think, you know, as long as you have decent lighting and you've set up the camera well, this is a pretty good camera for the money, and it's probably the only camera you'll find, or one of the only ones you'll find, that does 4K at 60 frames per second for $200. Otherwise, you'll have to get a really nice capture card and usually an APS-C or full-framed camera to do stuff like that. So it's pretty cool in terms of having that capability. So is it worth $200? I would say yes. There are pretty good options now. I was actually pretty impressed with the Hollyland Lyra as well, with the included microphone for around 160. It had a slightly larger sensor, 1/1.5 inch. And, you know, it was a pretty good camera, I gotta say. And it has the ability to shoot in portrait as well in terms of kind of more modern cameras. But you can't really go wrong with anything from Elgato in general. And if you got the whole Elgato stack with a Stream Deck and the prompter and everything else, and then you got prompter attachments you can use for this one, dial it in, use the NVIDIA SDK controls. It's a pretty solid camera. So hopefully this review will help you out in terms of making a decision for which webcam to buy. I have more content like this coming up. I didn't post for a couple of months, but now I'm going to post a lot of stuff. So be sure to subscribe to see all the things that I'm reviewing in terms of webcams and microphones, and I'll see you on the next one.